What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Mindful Muscle Podcast. We got another Q&A for you guys. Jake Parker here, my co-host, and we're going to answer some of your questions today on what is the last day of Q1, March 31st. And we got a few hot topics that we'll cover. We've got a couple things that we're super excited to share with you guys. And I think we got a really good question to start off in terms of just a personality question. But Jake, first of all, how's it going, man?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be here as always. It's a little colder than I would like here in Omaha. I'm looking forward to spring being finally upon us, maybe playing some golf and stuff like that, but happy to be here as always.
Question related to cold. Are you a hockey fan?
Not really, no.
I caught my first Seattle Kraken game last night.
Oh yeah, I
And
forgot that because that team's only been around for a couple of years, right?
no, this is their first year.
Oh, it's their first year.
It's
Okay.
their inaugural season, and they're atrocious. But hockey is so fun to watch. I've seen a few games, one in Chicago, one in Vancouver, and then the Seattle one last night. And people always say the best atmosphere would be a game 7 or just a playoff game in general of hockey. And I 100% agree. Having been to all the big major sports, hockey is so fun to watch. They turn up the speakers because it's in this smaller stadium and is a newer system. Maybe we were on the third level, so that was why. I felt like I was at a festival. Their
Mhm.
sound system was incredible, and they have a DJ that literally just plays pump up music the entire. Like they put Sandstorm in between pucks getting dropped. I was like, wow, they really want
Who did they
people.
play?
The Las Vegas Knights. So it was the two
Okay.
expansion teams playing together. So that was another cool
Yeah,
thing to
they're
see.
and they've always been good. I mean, like since they started the Knights.
Yeah, they went to the Stanley Cup Finals their first year, which is crazy. We were hoping the Kraken would do that. They did not do that. But cool. So first question, and this was prompted by something I saw on Twitter yesterday, and it was basically saying the average lifespan of a male is 75 years. So that means the average midlife for a male is 37 and a half years. And I think a lot of people take for granted that they're going to live for 100 or that 50 is middle aged or 40 is middle aged. And according to the data, 37 and a half is middle aged for half the population, which means the other half does get to be older, but there's also half that don't get to be that age. So it really made me think, man, I'm 31, I'm 6 years from middle age. When I die, and I look back on my life, what is like the one thing that I want to say I did? And there's a lot of them, and you could go a lot of different angles with this, but I want to flip this question to you first. When you look back on your life, whenever that is, what's the one thing you want to be able to say, oh, I'm glad I did that?
Um, I think that what comes to mind for me is, and I actually didn't mention this in the last podcast, but ever since I read the one thing, I started including in my journal every day to write down my one thing. And to sum it up, it's essentially just to help make people healthier and happier. And that's why the two avenues that I focus pretty much all my energy in life are helping people with fitness and nutrition and doing comedy. And because those things really inspire me, and I think that there's so much utility to those as well. And they are on the surface really different, but I think that they're, to me, it's just like how, I guess, with my skills and with what I value in life and what I see as valuable for other people, being healthy and happy is 80% of living a good life to me, give or take. But those are two things that I want to look back and say I did my best to help people be healthier and help people be happier. And the fitness piece goes hand in hand with the happiness, because I think there is a lot of happiness to be had with just having a sound mind and body, but then also just being goofy and silly and learning more about how to be a great comedian and making people laugh, because laughter is one of the most incredible things, and making people laugh is one of the most cool things that I know how to do. So that's what I would say for me, myself. How about you?
Yeah, first of all, that's a really good answer, and I've almost more inspiring than my answer. But for me, I look at the world as a house and I'm renting this house. Like my body is a version of is like a room and I'm renting this room. I don't get to stay in it forever. At some point I'll have to leave. And the world is this big house. And I don't want to look back and say, yeah, I just kind of just hung out in the foyer for most of my life.
Hmm.
Occasionally went to the kitchen, didn't really experience the upstairs, didn't really experience the basement, didn't go in the backyard. Apparently, there's this really cool game room. I never stepped foot in it. So for me, I just want to be able to look back and say, I saw a lot of things in terms of traveling, and I experienced a wide array of experiences. Because for
Hmm.
me, that would then say, during my lease on life, I explored as much of there was to explore without leaving as many stones as I could control unturned.
Hmm. Yeah, and what I would add to that is I think that sometimes people can put too much focus on like to have new experiences and to do really cool things, you have to travel. And that's a great way to do it. But something I try to think about my own life too is like there's a lot to be said for experiencing a wide variety of things just by reading broadly and watching things that you wouldn't normally watch and interacting with people that are very different from you. Because I agree, I definitely have the same mindset, but I think that's a challenge I would make to other people and a challenge I try to keep in mind for myself is just always challenge yourself with new points of view and try to step into why people live in different ways and why people think in different ways and read something new, watch something new. Because while travel is super cool, there's so much travel you can do just like with viewpoints and with your mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And that's a really good point, really good angle because America is so diverse. You don't have to go to every single country to learn about that country. You could just talk to your neighbor because odds
Mm-hmm.
are they're from a different country and have a different culture and have a different background. So it really is this idea of just being curious
Yeah,
and
that's it.
you can totally have what you enjoy in your culture and your way of living, but just go put yourself in as many different versions of that to really make sure that that's truly what you wanted. Because I think for me, that will lead to me living a happier life versus wondering what was that like. And then it makes me more certain of what I do choose to do, or I learn of something new and add that to what I'm already doing that I know I enjoy.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that not to get too off topic, but sadly, this is one of the things that I think leads to so much discourse in our society today. You know, with like politics, or so many people disagree on so many things, and that seems to be the focus, especially with social media. But there's also so many things we have in common. We have a lot more in common with people than we do that separates us. So that's just another way. That curiosity, I think, is another way to be open minded and accepting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I like yours, the making people laugh one, because at the end of the day, if you're laughing, that's great. That's the
Hmm.
name of the game is to be happy
the
and
thing I
laughing.
think the thing I think is most fascinating about laughter is that it's totally involuntary, and you really can't choose what you laugh at. You can kind of people can kind of fake a laugh, but that's obviously like not what I'm talking about. If you really just laugh really hard at something, you're not choosing that. And even in line with the health thing too, I think there's a lot of I mean not a lot of health implications with laughter, but just getting outside of yourself and doing something involuntary and just going to a different place in your mind. I know that there's some sort of there's got to be some sort of science to it, but just that release of laughter is unlike anything else that we do.
Yeah. Well, in order to be laughing, you have to be the exact opposite of stressed. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it just goes to show that laughter and happiness is the antidote to stress and sadness. I don't know if you were to invert those two. But let's get to the four questions that we've got for today. And this first one was a loaded one that my client Amy came to me with, and it was a great question. But on the previous podcast, I think it was me, I said 90% of your results are going to come from nutrition. And at the time, I want to say that it was a mix of hyperbole and just really trying to drive home the point of nutrition, nutrition, nutrition for the goal if it is an aesthetics goal. And then as we were talking through this, though, on our one on one, it really made me think through why is it that 80 or 90% of your results come from nutrition? And so we've got three different ways to look at that that would reaffirm that. And then I've got a couple other perspectives, and we'll go back and forth on why nutrition isn't as important. But the first thing you got to understand is what is the goal that you have? So there's three types of goals that we talk about within our triangle of goals in our program. Aesthetics-based goals, which is visual, losing weight, building muscle, changing your body composition. It's very visually driven. Then there's performance goals. So that would be jumping higher, sprinting faster, running a marathon faster, being stronger, measurable goals, very binary. Do you do them? Do you not? And then there's longevity goals, which is reducing the stress, wear and tear mentally, physically, in a way that allows you to live a long, happy, and healthy life for a really sustainable approach to fitness. And you can weave in and out of those depending on the season in your life. But when I look at nutrition, nutrition is definitely 80 or 90%. When I look at aesthetics, rather, nutrition is 100%, 80 or 90% of what you need to do. And so the three ways to look at that is one, the amount of time that it takes to burn calories versus consume calories. When you look at that ratio, you could eat a Chipotle burrito, 1,000 calories in 10 minutes, we'll just say. To burn that amount of calories off on a rowing machine would end up being 80, 90% more. So you can look at it from that perspective. And I don't want to dive into these too much, but then there's the other perspective of how much time you spend in the day working out. 1 hour workout is 4% of your day, 1 divided by 24. If you work out a little longer, or maybe you work in sleeping, maybe it's a little bit higher percent of your day when you're awake. So you could say 10%, maybe 15% if it's a long workout and you include walking. So that's another angle of where working out isn't as much compared to the entire day you're eating, the entire day you're sleeping and focusing on other things. And then we also can look at it through the lens of total daily energy expenditure and knowing that your exercise activity thermogenesis is 5 to 10% of what your calorie burn is for the day. So if we're trying to stay in a calorie deficit and we know those three things play a role, nutrition and just how your metabolism's working is really going to play 90% of that. Now, is there additional signs that maybe I'm not taking into account and cherry picking this? Sure. But wanted to flip it over to you, Jake, and just kind of get your perspective on those three things. But I think it's fair to say that you can do a lot of damage calorie-wise in a very short amount of time, but being on target nutritionally is a longer time horizon.
Yeah. Yeah. My favorite heuristic for this is there's a saying that you can't outrun your mouth. So, like Paul said, you can eat 1,000 calories in 5 minutes if you really want to. But you have to, it'll take 3, 4, 5 hours of exercise to burn that 1,000 calories. And I want to be careful with that statement too, because I don't like people to get too overly fixated on the amount of calories you're burning and looking at that in the lens of how many calories you're eating. But just keep in mind that it's so much easier to overconsume calories. And so if you're not focused on your diet, even if you're someone who is very adamant about exercising and getting that in on a daily, weekly basis, if you're not controlling your diet in some way, you're never going to be able to control for the amount of calories that you can eat. And I think that that's easily evidenced in just the average gym goer is, again, we talk so often about the detriment of you have a perfect diet Monday through Friday, but then Saturday, Sunday, you kind of go off the rails, you have your cheat day, you eat whatever, and you can totally just ruin a diet that way. It's so much easier than people realize to, especially if you drink, this can happen easier, but to consume 3, 4, 5, 6,000 calories in a day. And again, that can ruin a whole week's worth of progress. So yes, it's dependent on your goals, but because people like you and I, people who are our clients and are listening to this podcast, are focused mainly on body composition, you have to understand that there is so much more wiggle room, there's so much less wiggle room with diet than there is with training. And that's why, to me, I think saying that diet is 80, 90% of the game is a fair thing to say.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really glad that you called that out because we don't want to create this relationship of, oh, this muffin is 300 calories. It's going to take me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times up the stairs in my local. No, don't think that way. Your body's burning calories as you sit right now. Your brain burns 50% of your calories throughout the day. So that's not the question and the equation to be playing. But I'll give a lateral metaphor for this. I can spend $10,000 very quickly. It takes me much longer to bring in $10,000. So we don't go and say, hey, You know how long you're going to have to work to make that Gucci belt, purse, shoe, whatever back? No, we're like, yeah, that's an expensive piece. And if it, uh, full disclaimer, I don't have anything Gucci. That's just the first thing that comes to mind. But the way that you can spend calories and the way that you can spend money, and honestly, you flip this over to relationship, the way that you can do damage that took years to build up from a trust standpoint, anything that is destructive can happen in an instant. Anything that is good that takes time to build, if we're flipping it to another metaphor, like you can cut down a tree in 2 seconds, took that tree years to grow. And so I think it's just really understanding and honoring that the work is going to have a longer time horizon. You can definitely go and enjoy those things, but when you have a structure and a framework that we put in place with clients, it makes it so much easier to understand, oh, I can absolutely have this donut, no skin off my back. I'm going to enjoy it,
Mm-hmm.
no pressure. And just to wrap this up, when it's an aesthetics-based goal, nutrition, or the hierarchy is going to be nutrition, recovery, so nervous system, and basically just stress and sleep, and then training. It's not to say that training and recovery aren't important, but nutrition is literally what you put in your body and what your body transforms how you look into. Literally look at your wrist, and that at one point was an apple, which is kind of like a crazy way to think about it. Then when you look at a performance-based goal, you have to train and push your body to its limits. Then recovery is very important so that you can actually recover from how hard you're training. Then nutrition is really just a game of getting in enough calories. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people don't like to hear that, but a professional athlete is just eating. They're not thinking, oh, is this a good form of sugar? Is this a good carb? Is this a good? No, they're literally just like, give me 2,000 calories now. I need it. Michael Phelps isn't worried about whether or not something's gluten free. He's worried about whether or not it's 5,000 calories so that he can go swim for 4 hours.
Yeah,
Then when
and
you
that's
look at,
where I just think that's another good point to where, like, if you're an athlete, it's very different from someone like us who is just focused mainly on body composition. Because take like a baseball player, for example. They're focused on their training a lot, they're trying to improve their swing, they're trying to improve their fielding, and they're doing all these things. There's that sort of person. It's way less an aspect of nutrition that's going to help them to reach their desired goal. Whether they gain or lose a little bit of weight is not really a big deal for the most part. And they're not really focused on a body composition goal for that reason. But someone like you or I, who is mainly works out to look good, to have a strong, healthy body, that's where obviously nutrition is going to play such a key role. So it's contextual, but we obviously are putting these answers in the form of someone who would be like you or I, or a client of ours. And so that's where that kind of separation is there. But that's an interesting point to where someone who's like body composition focused to someone who is like a full-time athlete.
yeah, name an athlete, they don't care if they have an extra roll on their hip. If they can dunk the ball better or throw the ball further or run faster, great. If they can tackle the quarterback, you think they care if they got a little like pudge on their belly? No, it's honestly probably going to help them run through alignment. And,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's so many different sports you can think of, but what you don't want when you're athletic, and whether that's running a marathon, running a half marathon, trying to get your first chin up, you don't want to put the body with its hand tied behind its back because you're not eating enough food. That's
Mm-hmm.
going to trump, oh, is this a blueberry or is this a blueberry muffin? And again, food quality is really important. There's the spectrum to all this, but the last point is just longevity. Recovery is going to be the most important. Your sleep and your stress levels. Then you look at nutrition. Then you look at training in terms of that hierarchy. But I think just to wrap it up, nutrition, body composition goals, got to get it dialed in. There's no way around it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Cool. Next question. When should I move up or down in weight while lifting? Jake, take this one.
Yeah, so this is one of the questions that I highlighted, and I think it's an important, or rather salient time to talk about the RPE scale, which we've talked about before on the podcast. But RPE is just means rate of perceived exertion. And so when we say that, it's on a scale of 1 to 10. Usually we're having our clients go to about a 7, 8, maybe a 9 on a scale of rate of perceived exertion out of 10. And the reason that RPE is really useful in my mind is twofold. And one, you can change RPE or rather RPE changes with how prepared you feel for a day. So if I come into one workout and I'm really underslept, I had a bad night of sleep, I haven't been able to eat my normal meals, I'm feeling kind of beat up and sore, then an 8 RPE might feel, I guess, just to put some numbers on it, say I'm squatting, a 200 pounds might feel like an 8 RPE to me. And so that's what I'll do for that day. Another day I come in, I've had a great night of sleep. I've had some meals that are really filling and helping me feel good. I'm not sore. Maybe 220 feels like an 8 RPE to me. So that's one really big benefit of the RPE scale. And another one is that is what we can also use to move up in weight over time. So again, just using some numbers to make it more visceral. If 200 pounds feels like 200 pounds for a set of 10 feels like an 8 RPE one week, and then the next week it feels like a 6 or 7, then that is evidence that you can bring it up to 210 pounds or whatever is going to make you feel like you're back at an 8 RPE. So it's a good way to adjust over time. Basically, like I was saying, the easier a lift gets on that RPE scale, the more evidence you have that it's time to move up in weight. And again, the other benefit of that just being that RPE allows you to change the weights that you're using on different days just based on your readiness.
Yeah, I like RPE and RIR versus going off percentages. And keep in mind, 98% of the people that we're working with are general population. An athlete is going to look at a percentage based and say, okay, what is my 95% of my 1 rep max? That's going to back out how many reps you should do of your deadlift or whatever, versus having it be more based off of, to what you're saying, how you're feeling. Maybe you slept poorly, RPE is going to change. Maybe you slept amazing and had the most carb fueled meal right before, like 2 or 3 hours before, and it's just a day that you're going to crush a PR and it's totally random. And I think that's the beauty of it being self-modulated. Now, with that, you also got to make sure that you're not putting this governor on your head and saying, "Oh, that's heavy enough. Like I don't need to go any heavier." And really,
Mm-hmm.
the way that you can gauge that is just involuntary muscle fatigue. And if you can visually see, and this is why we love having clients film their form and send it into us so that we can see how they're moving with the weights. But you can see that too. And if you can see slowing down of the weight as it moves, well, now you know that you're in involuntary muscle fatigue and you're within probably 5 reps of failure. And that's how you know you're getting close to that 7, 8, 9 RPE. The other thing too to keep in mind with this is that RPE should be based off of clean reps. And it's not to say that you can't have like a shaky rep towards the end of a set, but if your form is absolutely trash, take a step back, go a little bit lighter. And I think that's another good way to really identify when should I go up, when should I go down. Ultimately, you want to be able to do the exercise safely and with full range of motion and with fluidity. So that's when I would go down. If you can't check that box, then once you can check that box, then go up and work into that RPE. And what we'll do for clients is we'll adjust the RPE based on the week that they're in so that towards the beginning of their program, it's a little bit lighter. And then they build towards the end of their monthly program so that it is heavier. And then we bring it back down to give them a little bit of a deload. But that's done at the monthly level. We work with several months at a time when we're looking at a program, but that way we have that undulation of higher RPE, lower RPE.
Yeah. And I think another important point here is realize you're not super fragile. So don't get too fixated on like, oh my God, I slept 6 hours instead of 8. I have to lower the weight. It's how you feel. And it's usually something that if you're really going to have to scale back, it's probably accumulation of a few days of poor sleep, of excessive soreness, of poor nutrition. If I have one day where I slept 2 less hours than I normally would have and had one less meal, I'm going to try to push the normal amount of weight unless I really, really feel bogged down. There's a perfect, well, there's not a perfect, there's an area you want to reach in the middle of using feedback and using a plan where you're not switching every single day based on how you feel, but you just have that in your back pocket to be able to back off when you really need it. I think that this is one big reason why I've never personally used like a Whoop band or anything like that, something that like tells you how well you slept. Because, and this is a point I think I heard on a podcast I was listening to at some point recently, but they said the disadvantage of using something like uh, uh, what do they call it? HRV, heart rate variability, which is
Yeah.
essentially like an indicative of recovery, is it can make people get too in their heads of, oh my God, I did this day, I did this day. And so you're expecting to feel a certain way. Oh, my HRV is high today, so I'm expecting to feel a certain way during my workout. Really just trust yourself and understand that some days you just have to push a little harder, and you have that reserve in the tank to push that weight that you've been pushing. But again, you have it in your back pocket that if you really do need to back off and you know that that's going to help you, then that's an option there too. But trying not to make every single week and every single day, vary based on how you feel.
Yeah. And I want to keep this a quick point, but when you're looking at data to get feedback at where you should go next, get multiple data points to create as full of a picture as possible. If you're only looking at HRV, or you're only looking at the scale, or you're only looking at how much weight you've gone up, there's so many other metrics to be looking at to see progression, to see regression, to see that you should speed up, to see that you should slow down. And again, that's something that we're super big within our program with the E4 Fit, is giving you 5, 6, 7, 8 ways to measure progress or to measure reasons to slow down. But just looking at your HRV and be like, yeah, I need to stop. It's this placebo that might totally be wrong for you. And there's 7 other data points that say you're great and you should go crush your workout.
And the thing about this that's also fascinating to me is I think there's so much to be gained from taking pieces from like the powerlifting, bodybuilding community. And I just say that because I know that it may seem very unapproachable because of the things that people may conjure up in their head of what that looks like. But so many of these things that we talk about have their basis in those worlds. And I like the word or the phrase like lifestyle bodybuilder. So someone who uses concepts from the bodybuilding world and applies them to how they work out, because at the end of the day we mostly work out to look good and feel good. And people like bodybuilders and powerlifters especially were some of the pioneers in some of this stuff that we now use in our day-to-day, especially like you or I. So just keeping in mind that it may seem overly scientific to be talking about RPE, to be talking about maxing out and stuff like that, but that is just the quickest way to our goal. And so that's why I think that it's useful to use stuff like that in your training, even if bodybuilding seems like a foreign world to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just taken from the pinnacle of it and distilling it down to where you're at in your career.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Next question, and I love this one. Do you think there's a subconscious correlation between watching football all day and wanting to eat those kinds of foods, whether it's from past habits or seeing commercials of those foods on TV, or is that something I'm making up? And you could insert football with college basketball, with baseball, with Bravo TV, like whatever it is that you're watching. But Jake, I want you to take a stab at this one first.
Yeah,
Why
I
do you think?
think definitely. I mean, your environment does so much to influence what you do. So, a really interesting example that I always think about in this context is back when the US was fighting in Vietnam, there was an outbreak of US soldiers that were becoming addicted to heroin while they were over in Vietnam because it was really readily available and they had a lot of time in their hands. And so what the government was worried about was that soldiers were going to come back to America and we were going to have a bunch of heroin addicted, heroin using American citizens on our hands. But what happened is when they came back to America and went back to their lives with their families and back to their normal jobs, there was a very, very low incidence of American soldiers continuing to use in America. So the lesson of that story is environment plays such a big role in what we do. So those soldiers, they had tied the heroin usage, something that's highly addictive, to being in Vietnam, being in combat, and coming back to their normal environment. It was easy to just stop. So that's just an extreme hyperbolic example of what environment can do as far as influencing our choices.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you touched on that because that's where I was going to go. And it really is putting you in a state psychologically of comfort. And another good example I like to use of this is the association that you create with food is typically associated with a time when you are relaxed, when you are happy, when you're having a good time. Emotions, memories are tightly linked within the brain. And so I'll give an example of mine. Some of my fondest memories are waking up Saturday morning, bowl of cinnamon toast crunch, and watching cartoons. That was when I would have been 9 or 10 years old, very relaxed, had a ton of fun, no problems in the world. Well, when The Mandalorian came out, it would come out and I would wake up on Friday mornings and I would watch it. And for some reason, I was like, man, I really want a bowl of cereal. And so I would get a bowl of cereal. And as a grown ass man, 30 years old, Friday morning at 6 a.m., I'm eating a bowl of cereal, watching my Star Wars TV show. And it was in that moment, and I've read different books and heard different people talk about this, but I'm basically coupling the two associations of Star Wars and cereal, cartoons and cereal, with being young, being relaxed, and reducing stress. And so you can see the same correlation with a song that you would listen to that's going to bring you back to a memory in time when you were your happiest, when you were having a ton of fun with friends. You can hear a sound of something clicking, and that's going to bring back a memory, and you're going to associate either positively or negatively. And this is honestly what trauma is as well. Your brain is just going and making a very quick decision on what that is and what state that's putting you in. That's why a loud bang for a soldier could instantly put them in fight or flight. That's why seeing a Bud Light commercial can instantly make you want to sit and watch football with the boys, or sit and watch whatever Bachelor with your girls, because that puts you in a time when you're relaxed, you're having fun, and that's something that we all want. We all want to be relaxed. We all want to have fun. And so I think that's a super interesting question, just because every single marketing company and people are paid millions of dollars, and these are billion-dollar industries and billion-dollar companies that know how to hijack the brain. And so if you see 50 commercials in a row of different types of things, eventually you're going to go and want to partake in that. And so I think that just goes to say, or goes to show, how powerful social media is, how powerful TV is, how powerful any media is, because at a deep subconscious level, it's programming your mind to want or to avoid certain things.
Yeah. I mean, another example that comes to mind for me is like I don't usually eat stuff like hot dogs or soft pretzels, but when I'm at like a basketball or a baseball game, I almost always have something like that. So 100%, I guess to answer the question plainly, yes, 100% different situations are going to have different um, drivers and motivators to do certain things. So I think that the best way to combat that is just to keep that in mind and do your best to take yourself out of situations that you don't want to be in. So if you don't want to, drink too many beers and have too many snacks when you go over to a friend's house and watch a football game, consider having a protein rich and vegetable rich snack beforehand and drinking plenty of water and just doing things where you know what your drives are going to be. So do your best to temper those to your best of your ability.
Yeah. And to give a couple tangible tips on this too, because there is a component to this question of how can I navigate these subconscious desires. And I see football on TV, I want to have a burger and hot dog and chips and dip, is really get to the root of what are you trying to create with the food? Is it relaxation? And what is it specifically about cracking of a can, popping of a top, pouring something into a glass? Could you get a similar effect if you poured a LaCroix into a cup with some ice water? That would be that of a seltzer. Could you get a similar effect of popping a top off a beer if it was a Topo Chico? And that's where I'll try and help people when we're just uncovering this, is saying habits love a vacuum. And if you just go and say, don't drink when you're watching football, well, something needs to go and fill that vacuum. And so if you can fill it with something that is very much a similar feel, similar, honestly, emotion that you get from it, or the release of dopamine that you get from it, you're going to be much more successful at parlaying that habit into something that's a little bit more in line with what you want.
It reminds me of how a lot of times when people quit smoking, they'll become really big, like gum chewers or sunflower seed chewers, just because you have that oral fixation. And so, like you're saying, it has to be replaced with something.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got one more question, but real quick, before I dive into that, I want to talk about the Mindful Muscle 30-day challenge that we launched yesterday. And it's going to officially launch on the 11th, but we came out with the details yesterday. And so you might be asking, why would I want to do another 30-day challenge? I feel like that goes against what you and Jake talk about all the time about long-term approaches. Well, you're right. Most 30-day challenges are going to take the approach of how much weight can you lose? How many workouts can you do? And then you get to the end of it and you're like, now what? I can't sustain what I was doing. This isn't a long-term fix. And so what this challenge is all about, it's going to use a lot of core concepts actually from the Atomic Habits book. Jake's going to take us through atomic fitness habits in weekly live trainings. I've got an entire mini course available within the program that's going to take you through identity settings so that you can link identity, beliefs, the core foundation that you need for transformation with the process that you need to do. You're going to get 30 days of workouts in the E4 Fit training app. You're going to get 6 recipe books. You're going to have everything you need to act and execute on the identity and beliefs that you're putting in place. And it's just a long enough time horizon that you need to where it's inevitable that you're going to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. And so we'll walk you through every single step along the way, give you all the tools you need to be successful. And so there is not a better deal that I think on the internet from a fitness standpoint, because it is literally $7, aka 23 cents a day, and you're going to get 30 days of expert design workouts. You're going to get the Mindful Muscle mini course with full length trainings. I'm filming specifically for this challenge on identity setting, metabolism syncing, mindfulness techniques, and more. 6 different recipe books. You get the private Mindful Muscle support group. Jake's going to take us through atomic fitness habits on live calls each week. You're also going to get all of the Down Dog Athletics Functional Flow, Down Dog Athletics Yoga for Runners, Hit It Home, and Core Crushers, which are different programs that I've filmed over the years. So all for $7. That link's going to be below in the description. I'd love to see you. Everything's going to start officially on April 11th. We'll have a kickoff call, but you'll get access to your training program as soon as you join. You'll get access to the mini course as soon as you join. You basically get access to everything as soon as you join. So don't wait. Join now. And if you got any questions, be sure and reach out to us, and we're more than happy to point in the direction for that. So, Jake, we got one more question. You ready for this one?
I'm ready.
Cool. So everyone has at some point seen or heard about the Chris Rock, Will Smith news, we'll just call it. A lot of things you can call it. But I wanted to get your take as a comedian, your perspective in seeing how that all went down. And it's really interesting for me seeing Will Smith and pairing that with the book that I'm going through right now. So it's a book called Battle Cry by Jason Wilson. And he's a black man that talks about the incarceration of men and how men, specifically men in the black community, have to fit this very toxic masculine narrative, and there's no way to really break out of that. Society wants to keep them in. So I think there's a lot of interesting things there, but had a lot of conversations with clients around this, around mental health, and so wanted to just share our thoughts. And Jake, I want to get your thoughts first on just what you saw, and did Chris Rock cross the line? What are you expecting as a comedian when you say jokes? When is it just a joke, and when is it not just a joke? Interested on your take.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I thought of is just very barbaric, like if you break it down, I mean, obviously no charges were pressed or anything, but that was assault, I mean, we live in a civilized society where you can't just go and commit acts of violence on people. So I think that's first and foremost why I just think it's totally inappropriate. That number one. And number two, when you're a comedian, so many of the things you're doing are just taking swings and taking different tries at things. And maybe in retrospect, given more information, given more, context, Chris Rock wouldn't have made a joke like that. But comedians are inherently going to take some swings and misses as far as jokes that may cross the line a little bit, or jokes that they wish they wouldn't have said in the moment. But at the end of the day, it's just all in humor. It's just all in trying to make people laugh, even though that's not always the outcome, unfortunately. But I don't know. It's crazy to me that I just think that violence is such a barbaric thing, and it's sad to see that happen on the biggest stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember seeing a quote, and it was related to comedy, but I think it parlays a lot into anytime you're trying to push the envelope, or whether it's as a comedian, you have to risk not being funny in order to be funny. In business, you have to risk failing miserably to go and innovate and change the world. In a relationship, you've got to risk your entire ego to fall in love and be happy and healthy in a relationship. And it's not to say that what he said is the same thing as going on a date with someone, but as a comedian, and again, you are in this industry, you're trying to make people laugh. You can't perfectly tiptoe this line that every single time they do the Oscars or every single time they do the ESPYs, every single time they have a host, people are getting roasted.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to understand that, again, I think that the most useful thing for being in the comedic world or listening to a comedian is you have to understand that the intent is just to make people laugh. So yes, sometimes, like I said, people take a swing and miss, but it's just under the guise of, I want to make everyone laugh. I'm not, besides like maybe the 1 in 100 just malicious people, I'm not trying to say mean things just to make people feel bad. I'm just trying to make everyone laugh. And I guess one of the things that is a part of my personal philosophy, and I've talked a lot with comedians that are friends of mine about, is I don't think anything's necessarily off limits as far as joking. But that being said, I think the more you dip your toes into risky territory or things that have more, just negative connotations, I think the bar is just a lot higher to be sure that those things that you're saying are funny. So, like I said at the beginning about laughter, it's involuntary. That's one of the most fascinating things about it. So, some of the best comedians or some of the most renowned comedians are the ones that can say something that they shouldn't be saying, or that is kind of against like the grain of what popular society sees as appropriate, and then makes you laugh. So I think that anything can be joked about, but the more risky the topic is, the higher the bar is for just, I know that this joke is bulletproof funny.
Yeah.
And
And
so it's like I think it's silly to me to take a risk at uh a kind of a risky joke if you aren't sure, or you're just like, it's kind of funny,
yeah, well, and at the Oscars and on live TV, and when people, I guess in comedy, everyone's always right in front of you, but we all know that person that says things that other people can't say just in their tone and their delivery. And it's funny when they say it, but when you like, and you laugh, and we've all laughed at things and then gone back and thought, why am I laughing? And you saw that with Will Smith. He was laughing at the joke. And this is where looking at his side of the coin is interesting for me, because he's grown up, or his entire career has really been this like pursuit of happiness, Fresh Prince of Bel Air. He's really had to be in this role of like the model person, at least from my perspective. And so, what this book and this guy was talking about on the initial podcast I was listening to that had me want to go check this book out is women have done an amazing job at putting their foot in the ground and saying, we won't be in a box. We can be feminine, but we are not only feminine. We do not only exist in the kitchen. We do not only exist to do X, Y, and Z. We are expansive. We are comprehensive. We can do anything. And you've seen them fight for decades to really push that ground. But for men, there's been very little attempt to work outside of the box of masculinity. It's randomly, I didn't even plan this, but I've got my lumberjack shirt on, but it's really this idea of you have to have a beard and an axe and a lumberjack, and you got to fight and shoot guns and be really strong, and that's an alpha masculine man, right? And I think there's a lot of people that would say, well, there's a lot of different ways to be a man, so that isn't necessarily what is right, but there's a lot of that in society, and in different subsets of the American society and culture, there's even more of a pressure to be hard, to stay hard, to really put yourself in this emotional incarceration, like this book says, to where you can't express emotions. And what happens with that, and the word toxic masculinity is something that gets thrown around, and I think there's an interesting way to look at this. Anytime I talk about emotion, I like to break the word into two pieces: energy, in motion. And if you have a river that doesn't have an inlet, doesn't have an outlet, you essentially have a stale body of water. And when things don't get a good flow of that energy, of that emotion, you're going to get a lot of death, decay, and really toxicity in that river. A lot of just dead water, a lot of dead, dying things inside of it because you don't have that flow. So when, and it's not to say this is exactly what Will Smith is going through, but when a man in that situation is under a ton of pressure, their relationship's been scrutinized, we don't know what's going on with him internally, but anytime you have someone who isn't allowed to process that emotion and get that flow of energy and emotion in, out, and express it out and really release that, whether that's trauma, generational trauma, micro trauma, whatever it is, that's how you get this situation where the top just blows off. And I'll use the metaphor over and over, but you poke holes in a baked potato before you put it in the oven so it doesn't explode. Well, releasing that trauma or having ways to do that and feeling safe to do that is how you get to a point to where you don't go and explode. And when you look at men, they have a 3.3 or 3.5% more likely to die of suicide. They struggle a lot more with not being able to open up, and then what that leads to from a violent standpoint to themselves, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and whatnot. And so I think that is just a really extreme way of showing how important it is for guys to have a way to feel safe, to express their emotion, and recognize that the box of masculinity is something that you can go into, but you don't have to stay inside of, and you are still a man if you deviate from this societal box of what a guy is supposed to be, as I air quote.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. It reminds me of I really like the movie Moonlight. Have you ever seen that?
No.
It's very similar to, I guess, kind of what you're talking about along the lines of what that book is about. A gay man who's in the Black community, and he's very respected, like becomes, you know, a drug dealer and all this stuff. And I guess the point of the movie is just to show how difficult it is to navigate homosexuality or anything along the feminine aspect of nature, especially like in the Black community.
Yeah.
Even because that's, like you said, like along the lines of hypermasculinity. Obviously all men can see that, but I think um as far as I understand, obviously I'm not an expert, but I think in the Black community that's something that's been like even more of a struggle of that hypermasculinity.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, again, the book is by Jason Wilson, Battle Cry, Waging and Winning the War Within. So I'd recommend that to anyone who wants to learn more about that. But he was the one, I don't know if you remember seeing it. There was a viral video that went out of a little boy in his program that he teaches, and it was basically this boy was trying to punch through a block of wood, a 2x4. He couldn't. And then the boy started crying. And so this man, Jason Wilson, goes and comforts him. The boy tries again, breaks through the wood. And so that's a lot of the work that he does. And that was the video that went viral. So if you haven't seen it, that's totally fine. But the point that he was making in that is, even as young boys, we don't know how to process that emotion of fear of failure. So the boy was just crying inconsolably. He's like, "Hey, man, it's okay. You got it." I don't know exactly what he said to him, but
Mm-hmm.
that's, anyway, a really good book to go and check out. And to your point, not knowing how to process or not feeling safe to process emotions in any community, but I think especially in communities where you have to present this hyper masculine presence, makes it even more important to have that outlet for yourself. And I like the word outlet because think of like a river. You are a river. You are a living body of water. The inlet is a river that is bringing in emotions. That's just life. Having an outlet is equally as important so it doesn't get stale. Energy in motion is emotion. And so that's where journaling, exercise, therapy, good community of friends, being able to have a good cry, being able to do whatever you need to do to let it out, that is your outlet. And that is very important to have.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's a good um, stance on the whole events of this week that hasn't really been talked about a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So that is the Q&A for March 31st. We obviously want you guys to check out the 30-day challenge if that is something that you are interested in. The link is going to be below in the description. As a reminder as well, if you're in the local Seattle area, we got a 15% off discount at Fuller NutriFuel. You can go to Fuller NutriFuel. Link's going to be in the description as well. Use Paul15 to get 15% off food delivered to your door every Sunday and Wednesday. Meal prep, save you time, save you money. And then join the Mindful Muscle Facebook group. You can learn about everything that we're doing for that 30-day challenge, as well as drop in some questions for this Q&A. And we'll keep hammering out these hot topics. Some of them are deep, some of them are heavy, some of them are shallow, and it's just a fun time. I was talking about this with Jake before. This is our favorite thing we do each week. So
For sure.
Appreciate you guys listening. We'll catch you guys next time on the Mindful Muscle podcast.